Welcome to the Pivot Point podcast. This season, I'm focused on sharing stories and ideas from experts on diversity and inclusion. In this episode, I will share some ideas and insights from my guest expert, Joe Miller. Together, we will leave you with some actionable tips to think about and discuss with your organization. We share this information because inclusive leadership is a journey. It requires bravery and courage, and you do not have to do it alone. At Next Pivot Point, I believe we are stronger together. We are one. So we have a special guest with us this week. Joe Miller is a women's leadership expert, globally renowned authority on women's leadership. She's dedicated 2 decades to helping women advance into positions of influence by leveraging their leadership strengths. Based on her work with hundreds of thousands of women, she's developed a pragmatic and powerful roadmap that guides emerging women leaders from where they are to where they aspire to be in their careers. She's the award-winning author of Woman of Influence, 9 Steps to Build Your Brand, Establish Your Legacy, and Thrive, just out hot off the presses. And she's also co-authored a research study, Out of the Comfort Zone, How Women and Men Size Up Stretch Assignments and Why Leaders Should Care. Also, CEO and company founder of Be Leaderly, a firm focused on leadership development, consulting, and research initiatives to elevate women's voices at work. Fun fact, she grew up in Australia, so you're going to notice a bit of an accent here, which is always fun for our listeners. Thrived for a decade in Silicon Valley and now calls Iowa home. Wow, what a geographic, diverse set of experiences. She's been celebrating life free from breast cancer since 2016. That's an amazing story there, I'm sure. And she believes that when life hands you lemons, you should stuff them in your bra and sing ta-da. That's awesome, Joe. Joe, welcome. Thanks so much for making the time.
Ta-da! Great to speak with you, Julie.
Awesome.
We need like a little stagecraft there, a little jazz hands, if your listeners can imagine that.
The visual. Yeah, we got to see
Yes.
that. Yep. I love it. Well, Joe, what amazing experiences you've had personally and professionally in your career. And, as a kindred spirit in the women's leadership space, I'm so thankful for your voice being out there and for elevating women all over the world. How did you get into this work? I remember when I first got into women's leadership work, I'm like, you can't really do that for a living, can you? How did you find your way to this kind of dream job?
Thanks for asking. So about 15 years ago, I was doing individual coaching, career coaching, life coaching, a little bit of leadership coaching. And I was in a conversation with a woman and she said, that she'd been really high potential early on in her career and things had really advanced and moved for her, but she'd kind of got to a stuck point where she felt like the best kept secret in the organization. And it was just one of those moments that stopped me in my tracks because it resonated so strongly. Like, I think that I had been that back in the day in my very short-lived career in the corporate world before I left to go become a coach and trainer and speaker. And it just resonated so deeply. She said, I feel like I'm the best kept secret in this big organization. I feel like I'm the invisible employee. And I realized that so much of who I was really stemmed from having that situation myself. I started my career, I was really aggressive, wanted to advance, and yet didn't know necessarily all the right moves to make. And I probably came across with this fairly unpolished, raw ambition that got me into trouble in certain ways and in certain situations. And so I think it was really just recognizing that wow, there are women like me out there who have aspirations, but don't necessarily know the steps to take. And it kind of kicked off, over a decade of exploration as to what are the barriers that we face as women, but then what are some really practical steps we can take to, blast through those and move ahead.
Oh, yeah. I mean, when you hear a story like that of somebody that's forgotten, somebody that's not seen, that they're not heard inside their organization, or you can't feel like you belong if you feel like you're hidden talent. You can't help but feel compassion and empathy and wanting to help and realizing that story is a shared experience across a lot of women all over the world that feel overlooked and the best kept secret in the organization. If only they knew, they'd really maximize the productivity and quality of their employees, as we know. So Joe, tell me about the new book. I'd love to hear, what inspired you to write it, and what you're hearing, what kind of feedback you're hearing from listeners that and readers that are using the tools from women of influence.
Oh, thanks for asking. And so really a large part of the inspiration was conversations like the one that I just mentioned with women that had, bucket loads of potential and were delivering phenomenal results and, should have been kicking butt in their careers. And yet for some reason that their leadership strengths were going underseen or under leveraged. They really were the hidden talent in their organizations. And so another project that I've done over the years was a webinar series where I've interviewed over 100 very seasoned, very successful women leaders. And so I, naturally ask them questions about their journey and the roadblocks they've faced. And a lot of the stories and practical advice came to light. And I really was able to kind of hone in on, some steps, some really practical steps that anyone can take. And so after years and years of teaching these programs and having these conversations and talking to women at all levels of their careers, the book really brings together a lot of those stories, but also I'm a real kind of practical step by step. Like I'm just like, give me the roadmap, just give me the steps. And so that's what I've created in the book, from realizing that you're probably already more of a leader than you think, to
Mhm.
understanding your leadership, your unique leadership style and strengths, and then building a personal brand around that. That's kind of the core and the heart of the book. And so building not just a personal brand, but truly a leadership brand. So I'm helping readers kind of boss up their brand, so to speak.
Yeah.
And
Well,
so
women often don't self-promote, right? They kinda hold back, wait for someone to tap them on the shoulder, and so giving them tools that it's okay to advocate for yourself, and actually your company wants you to.
yes, exactly. And I think to not self-promote is actually a learned behavior, and it's really
Yeah.
rational given a lot of the experiences that women have had in their careers. Even as, very young girls will speak up and call attention to ourselves, and someone will say, no, no, dear, that's not okay.
Right.
Don't, you're coming across as too much, too loud, too aggressive. And so we learn to make ourselves small.
Mhm. It is, it's gender socialized, it is, and it's not helpful for either gender. Boys will be boys and stuff your emotions, and then the other message of women, girls please others, yeah. Don't be bossy. That language isn't supportive of really any human. It's not good for to put in those boxes. So I love that. When you fast forward to the workplace, you start to see the negative effects of that with not taking ownership of our careers or not having that plan. So those 9 steps, I'm sure extremely powerful and build that confidence of women. So tell us, Joe, I know you're inside organizations and stages all over the world talking about this topic. Where are we at? Kind of early 2020, where are you seeing companies focused on that truly get, things like gender equality and women's leadership and organizations that are firmly planted on this journey? What are those trends that you're seeing?
One of the first things that comes to mind is I'm seeing a real divergence among companies that have been doing the work and have been having the conversations, versus the companies that are fairly early on that journey, or, as you know, just ignoring it completely. And so I was out at Dolby in San Francisco, for example, just last week, and I was really just so impressed by the level of sophistication in the diversity inclusion conversations that I was hearing from employees at all levels of the organization. And I just remember thinking, wow, here is an organization that's clearly made it a focus. And of course, as I talked to some of their employees and executives, yes, of course they had. And so that's one thing. We're really starting to see some very sophisticated conversations among employees at all levels, inside companies that are taking this work really seriously. That's certainly one piece. Another thing I'm seeing is, maybe 5 or so years ago, there was such a strong focus on women employees networks as a real grassroots organization, women advocating for themselves, women coming together with other women. And what I'm seeing now is a kind of a larger a larger tent that they're creating, where they're truly inviting all of their allies to their events, to, to be a
Yeah.
part of the organization. We're seeing male allies as the president of a corporate women's network, for example, with large clients I've worked
That's
with.
great.
And so that's been a really great trend to see as well. These employee groups are becoming more and more inclusive and
Yep.
creative in their approach.
Which is funny that ERGs, when they did get started, employee resource groups are also known as business resource groups, depends on your company. When they first got started with some of the progressive companies, it was really like the late 2000s. And, people needed a safe place to be brave and be with people like them. Fast forward 10 years, that exclusionary practice at the beginning was intentional and probably necessary, but now being inclusive, right, to our allies and including everybody in the conversation, even if you don't identify with that diversity dimension. It's really important. And I love the word that you use, Joe, divergence. There's companies that get it and that are committed to this, and there's other companies that, for lack of a better word, are just pretty far behind, and they're only going to get further behind. That's problematic for a lot of reasons. If you're not on this journey, or if you're just starting to get an employee resource group, for example, or just starting to have champions around diversity and inclusion, it takes a long time to build a culture that's about allyship and inclusion and truly wanting diversity for the right reasons. So I tell people, like, you need to get started now. If you're not there now, you're already behind. And I don't like to use fear as a message around allyship, but we just know, that's a great example of 10 years of hard work. Like Adobe has been at this for a really long time. That's why they are where they are today. So it's not a light switch. It's not, can't flip the ally button, you know. But I think if you really are intentional and focused on it, you can separate yourself. And this is a game changer. You can attract really, really amazing talent when you're good at these things. So, Joe, I want to dig into something else that I know you're passionate about, you've written about, you're an expert on. Sponsorship versus mentorship. This is a hot topic, especially with women right now. Do we need sponsors? Do we need mentors? First of all, help our listeners understand what those two are, how you define those two terms, and then where are you at? What's your perspective on sponsorship and mentorship with women?
Sure, absolutely. And sponsorship, as you and I discussed earlier, is a topic that I'm really passionate about. But one of the first questions I get from people is, okay, but is that like a mentor? How are sponsors different than mentors? And so I invite people to think about it this way. So mentors give you perspective where sponsors will give you opportunities. Mentors will talk with you, but sponsors talk about you. And then mentors help you skill up where sponsors help you move up. So
Mm,
after I
good
explain
stuff.
those three differences, people are usually fairly clear about the difference. But then of course, the big question is, okay, how do I get a sponsor? But of course, it's not like going out and asking that person you admire to become your mentor. It doesn't work that way. You typically don't choose the sponsor and approach them. Rather, they choose you. And oftentimes it happens, behind closed doors in ways that are unseen to you as well. So it's a lot more tricky and complex to think about how do you attract sponsorship, versus go ask someone that you admire to be your mentor.
So important. You're not in control of the sponsorship, but you can influence it, right? A
Yeah.
lot of times I talk with women, if you don't know what you want, how the heck is anyone going to help you? And so, really defining your intentions, your goals, where you see yourself in the future, the more you're communicating that proactively, right, the more sponsorship is likely to find you. But, what are you thinking as far as the future? Kind of again, kind of put our crystal ball out there if you could. Where are you seeing as far as women leaders and organizations that are truly committed to women leaders and diversity and inclusion? Where are they with mentorship programs and sponsorship? What are they doing right in those areas?
That's interesting. And I've not seen a lot of dedicated sponsorship programs, though I would really encourage companies to think about those and look into them. Typically, we think of mentorship programs as being a standalone. And, a lot of companies will have some type of mentorship program where you have your mentees, you have your mentors, you pair them together. And it's often a standalone initiative. Companies that have created sponsorship programs are often not having it be a standalone, but rather adding a sponsorship component into an existing leadership initiative. For example, one organization took their took the high potential identification process for their kind of emerging leaders program, and started to look more broadly in different, pockets of talent within the organization. So they just started to look more for diverse candidates. But then once they found those diverse candidates, they paired them with executive sponsors who made a commitment, like a real results-oriented commitment to help push that person's career forward. So that's just one example of kind of enhancing an additional talent or leadership program with a sponsorship component.
Yeah, yeah, I love that. I haven't heard a lot myself about formal sponsorship programs, but I think regardless of your stance on that, if you're listening, listeners, think about how talent management, succession planning, these processes are handled inside your organization, and really make sure that you're advocating for women and people with diverse backgrounds and leaders that have led diverse teams when you're assessing talent in the pipeline, and assessing sponsorship needs. That's something you can do regardless of where you are from a process and infrastructure perspective. And you're right, mentorship programs do kind of stand alone. I've seen varying levels of success. I know my old organization, my first job out of college at Caterpillar, I was assigned a mentor, and actually someone I keep in touch with to this day, fantastic. She was really good for me, so I got lucky, but a lot of my colleagues did not. There wasn't a match, and it was kind of this awkward lunch that never happened again. So that matching process is really important. Now, Joe, I want to ask you about this. Like, why does we know there's data out there, right? Men are more likely to be mentored, right, than women for a lot of reasons. But why does something like sponsorship matter so much? Why is this such a hot topic?
Well, and I think this goes back to one of the very first studies that I saw on sponsorship, and this is in 2010 in Harvard Business Review. The authors of the article were sharing about a study that they'd done where they found that high potential women were over mentored but under sponsored relative to their male peers. And that was one of the reasons that these women weren't advancing as rapidly as in their careers. And I think, we often have a tendency to want to mentor women, to help them skill up and improve. But that performance really goes nowhere if you don't have a commitment to putting them in those high profile, high visibility, next level roles.
Yeah. Oh, that's good. That's good stuff. Yeah. The mentorship piece, I often have, in when I'm doing talks, and maybe you do something like this too, just kind of show a hands exercise. So this is anecdotal data from Julie Kratz. Take it for what it's worth. But the mentorship thing, I'm starting to see many more women raising their hands when I ask them, do you have a mentor now? And oftentimes though, if there's males in the room, they always raise their hand. So there is a gap there. But to your point, like the effectiveness of a mentor versus a sponsor is going to open doors for you that you don't even maybe know that they're doing, right? It can happen behind closed doors, to your point. But they're the ones that have influence in the organization that can put you in positions you want to be in, or in stretch assignments that we know women don't get as much access to. And a lot of that I find has to go with those unconscious biases of affinity bias, right? I like people like me, and guess who's in charge of most companies? White guys, right? So they mentor, they sponsor younger versions of themselves, or say things like, he reminds me of me when I was younger. And it's like, oh, so it's a bit of a chicken and egg problem, because we need more women up there to pull more women through, but it doesn't always happen that way. So we really need our male allies to sponsor, to champion women, in addition to doing the mentoring. That's important too, but I think you make a great case for sponsorship, and that's the evolution. It's always changing. So with that in mind, Joe, if you had to, based on your years of experience and the success stories you've experienced with your clients, if you had to kind of narrow it down to one thing you'd offer to our listeners that they could focus on to drive more diversity and inclusion and gender equality in their workplace, what might you offer?
Just one. Okay. I may give a slightly longer answer here than you're
Please.
expecting. But look, one of the things I've learned as I've reviewed the literature and research is that when you drop a pebble in the pond, by sponsoring someone, you can create quite wide ripple effects. And so, one of the things that we know is that people who've been sponsored are more likely to pay it forward and sponsor others, and they build more, more committed leaders in the leaders that they're bringing up. And so you don't necessarily have to be a senior executive to be a sponsor. You just need to be aware of your own influence and use it to advocate for someone else. And so I would say, that maybe a memorable way of putting it is, don't just be a leader, and don't just be a leader who develops other leaders. If you want to leave that intergenerational, long-lasting leadership impact that long outlives your own lifetime, be what I call an L to the power of three, and that's be the leader who develops leaders who develop leaders. And I always say to people, if you're with me, just repeat after me: L, yes.
Oh, yes. That's good stuff, Joe. Yeah, I mean, that's when you're really elevating. You think about your influence too. I mean, if you're leading leaders that are leading leaders, wow, that's quite the ripple effect, like you shared. It's quite the domino effect of setting in tone kind of a series of actions, that will drive a more diverse and inclusive workplace. And, I often talk with leaders about modeling what you want to see from others, right? If you want, what, excuse me, if you want your team to behave in a certain way, and you really have to take that step and put yourself out there and do it, model it so the team will really follow suit. And I think, if you think about human behavior and how we mirror and model behavior that we see from others, people pick up on this. And so you think about L to the three, right? L, yeah. I love that because you're setting in motion a whole series of events by your own actions. Joe, it's been such a pleasure to have you on with me today. I'm getting all choked up here at the end. uh, I'm curious for our listeners. Excuse me. For our listeners that want to follow you, what's the best way to stay in touch and support and connect your work?
Thanks for asking. So I just got done launching the book, and then my very next step was to create a lovely new website, which I hope you find just as gorgeous as I found the first time I saw it. But it's joemiller.com. And of course, there you'll find all the different ways to connect with me across the various social media.
Yeah, it's beautiful. And it really displays, I think, in a good way, how people can connect with your content, how they can hire you to speak, and of course, how they can get their hands on those books. So thank you so much for being in this space and supporting this amazing message. It's really is I feel like it's my life's work and my calling to talk about women's leadership, diversity and inclusion, and gender equality in the workplace. So I'm so thankful that our allies like you are out there spreading this incredible message.
Thanks. It was a pleasure speaking with you.
All right. Did you know that you can find all 5 seasons of our 50 plus episodes at nextpivotpoint.com? And you can sign up for a complimentary 7-day preview of our new program, Lead Like an Ally, and order our new book, Lead Like an Ally. I appreciate you listening to this episode. Who do you know that needs to hear this message? Hit the share button, connect with me on LinkedIn, or simply search Julie Kratz, Kratz. I host this podcast because I believe we are stronger together. We are one.